On September 16th, Representative Gabe Vasquez formally announced his re-election campaign. Recent polls have him and his Republican opponent, Yvette Harrell, basically tied, and several news outlets are calling him one of the most vulnerable members of Congress. And we know that last election was a close one, and we suspect yet another tough road to victory in 2024. But right now, we want to dedicate this episode to an overview of what Gabe's been up to during his time in office, and we think it's pretty great. Sally Davis with Blue City 2 New Mexico joins us today to give us a report on all the good things Gabe Vasquez has been able to accomplish in less than 10 months in office.
So Blue City 2 New Mexico helped elect Gabe Vasquez, and now we're aiming to re-elect him. I want to look at his record so far. It's been 9 months, almost 10 months, and let's see what he's done in those 10 months. For the first time in years, Gabe Vasquez opened up community project funding requests for our district. The former representative did not accept any funding requests during her term in 2020 to 2022, but Gabe has announced over $30 million in proposed grants for community project funding. Some of the projects, these, of course, will be approved when the budget is finalized and has been signed by the president, anyway. So let's look at some of the proposals that Gabe has approved. Streetlights, ramps, and sidewalks for the city of Las Cruces, renovating a Boys and Girls Club facility in Las Cruces, a permanent food pantry in Hatch, a wastewater treatment facility in Columbus, New Mexico, and also in Luna County, mobile command center, renovating the Lordsburg Community Center, wastewater system improvements in Bayard, Grant County, a big Department of Transportation improvement to I-10 outside of Silver City, and building a new Gila Community Center after the old one closed in Catron County. New Agricultural Economic Development Center in Bernalillo County's South Valley. Reconstructing a 2-mile stretch of Atrisco Boulevard, also in the South Valley. And that particular renovation project would bring about 13,000 jobs to the area. So that's a terrific use of federal funds. In Eddy County, one of the funding grants would replace water lines in an oil well field that's losing about 12 million gallons of water a year. This is the Double Eagle water system that is a decades-long project that allows the city of Carlsbad to grow in a desert environment. So this would repair that leak. The funding would provide a new fire protection vehicle for Isleta Pueblo, and an emergency operations center in Sierra County, and something the state police love, handheld radios and satellite communication technology to help improve law enforcement communication in our rural communities. Really important. Besides these funding requests that are pending, are rural development grants that have already been awarded. So Backyard Farms in Las Cruces has gotten the grant to purchase technology that could preserve locally grown fruits and vegetables for longer periods of time. 4A Packing got a grant to use local chili in a new product, and New Mexico Wineries in Lordsburg was funded to build a solar array to generate enough power to power 38 homes down there. Anthony has received a grant to improve its sewer system, and Deming and Luna County Economic Development has received a grant to provide training for small rural businesses in Luna County. So this is terrific community outreach that will make a real difference for a lot of people in the Southern District. Then I want to talk about some of the issues that were brought up in the 2022 midterm election, in which Gabe was elected by a narrow margin. I see the issues as being about opportunity versus fear. They were talking about the same issues, but Gabe Vasquez always spoke about those issues as potential opportunities for our district. Gabe always talked about the rural economic development possibilities related to the border. And he talked about our struggles with immigration as really important for the development of our agriculture. And he always emphasized the environment and public lands versus just more oil and gas drilling. And Gabe stood for reproductive rights and justice, while Yvette was really anti-reproductive rights. So let's see what he's done since getting elected. And I will highlight the bills and the actions he's taking that simply would not exist had he not been in Congress. One of the first bills that Gabe introduced is a bipartisan bill. He worked with a fellow representative, a Republican in Arizona, to write a bill that would pave a path to visa reform for our temporary agriculture workers. So this is really a problem. We have not had immigration reform laws that needed to be updated for decades. This would pave a path to that by asking a federal agency to look at what needs to be reformed in the H-2A visa program, so that once the reform could happen, we would have a workforce on our farms that our farmers are desperate for. And it would also ensure fair wages and decent housing for farm workers, something also important to people and to farmers. Gabe addressed the border, and he introduced a bill called the Economic Opportunity for Border Communities Act. This is a bill that would not exist were it not for Representative Vasquez. And this calls on the Department of Commerce to create a national strategy to increase the number of jobs in our border communities. Already, we've seen the sanitary support and industrial parks have created 6,000 jobs. They've had $1 billion in output, and they've paid $26 million in taxes. So we already know that the border is a potential place for economic development, for jobs. So this would build on that and create border jobs in transportation, in, I think they call it logistics, in commerce, not only in our border, but in the border regions in the country. They've also addressed the issue of narcotics coming across our border with another bipartisan bill. This would authorize the Department of Homeland Security to create a joint task force to improve our border security, to keep drugs from being smuggled into the U.S. This is a bipartisan bill as well. And just recently, Gabe called on the House Republicans to stop talking about drugs at the border and border issues without doing something and voting on this bill. If they are calling a crisis, he's given them an opportunity to do something about the crisis. And there's another bill that is quite innovative. In fact, it's the only time anyone's introduced or even considered this concept. And this is to help our oil and gas workers in the Permian Basin who do the hard and dangerous work of drilling and refining oil and gas in the southeastern region of New Mexico. With the oil boom, oil and gas companies have made record profits. This bill, the Energy Workers Health Improvement and Compensation Fund Act, would require executives to contribute to a fund that would cover the healthcare expenses for their workers and their workers' families for illnesses that are related to the work. The methane that pours out of the oil wells creates big problems for people who live around and work around the oil fields. Lung-related diseases like asthma and also cancers are caused by the methane, and this is well established. So this would protect our oil and gas workers who do the work that provide the huge economic benefits that come to our state from oil and gas. And Representative Vasquez partnered with the energy workers themselves to create the bill, to write the bill, and with an organization called Somos un Pueblo Unido, who are advocates for those oil workers, energy workers. And then also in these short 10 months, Representative Vasquez has taken care of little details like getting charging technology for electric school buses that the EPA gave to the city of Las Cruces and a few other cities in New Mexico. The buses were given to our communities, to Las Cruces, but they did not include the charging technology. So Gabe introduced a bill that will allow Las Cruces to charge those buses that are going to make a difference for the lungs of inhabitants of Las Cruces. And he's also worked really hard on restoring air service to our rural communities and funding our regional airports. If you live in a rural area, you know that the airports are like a lifeline to businesses and to people, connecting them to other parts of New Mexico and even beyond our borders. So when the FAA reauthorization was taking place, Gabe made sure to include an amendment that would study the Alamogordo White Sands Airport closing, so that study the economic costs of closing that airport with an aim to reopening it. And this thrilled the officials in Alamogordo. He introduced the Expanding Regional Airports Act, which provides federal funds for our regional airports. One of the results is that there's now a Las Cruces to Albuquerque flight, again, connecting our cities in this enormous state that we live in. Gabe introduced the Wolf and Livestock Fairness Act, the Wolf Act, they call it. This is a bit controversial, but it addressed the concerns of ranchers that they have not been compensated for the value of the cattle lost to wolves. And this would increase the compensation from 75% to 100%. And let's look at some other issues that now, let me talk about those having to do with the environment. Gabe made sure that, I think, working with our other congressional representatives in New Mexico, that we got federal dollars to train and provide infrastructure for the new Sunzia Wind and Transmission Project that's going to provide renewable energy all across the southern region of New Mexico and into Arizona. It's a huge project and it needed support. And Gabe made sure that those federal dollars will be there for it. He's partnered with the Mescalero Apache tribe to protect Otero Mesa and keep a campground open in the Gila Wilderness. And he's partnered with Senator Heinrich to do a House version of a bill, the Dutch Salmon Greater Gila Wild and Scenic River Act. It's a long title, but it would designate parts of the Gila as wild and scenic for recreational and agricultural economies that rely on it. So preserving this gorgeous landscape and allowing appropriate economic development for recreation and agriculture. And now I want to talk about a vote on a bill that was controversial. And then that was a vote for the National Defense Authorization Act. which is something that occurs every year. But this year, our MAGA Republicans added culture war items to this bill that is usually just reauthorizing defense spending. So they added these culture war items like rescinding reimbursing travel for abortion, or rescinding access for transgender care, or rescinding diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives at the Pentagon. Well, there's 2 military bases in the 2nd Congressional District, Holloman Air Force Base and White Sands Missile Range Army Base. So an Air Force and an Army base. And that's important background to know about this vote. The other piece of information you should know is the House bill that he voted on is not a final bill. The Senate bill creates their own version, and then there's a reconciliation vote merging the 2 bills. One other piece of background information is Representative Vasquez is one of Republicans' top 5 targets, with the House balance of power being so narrow, and now it's just narrowly controlled by Republicans. Every single House representative is important, but especially one in a swing district like ours. So you can imagine the ads that would target Representative Vasquez if he voted against defense spending authorization in a district with 2 military bases. I mean, the ads practically write themselves. So he's in a tough position. Does he vote to authorize defense spending, or does he vote against it because of the culture war items that are in it? So here's what he decided to do. He voted for the authorization bill, but only after adding dozens of provisions to the bill. Some of those provisions were expanding childcare on military bases, or making sure that there are reports on the PFAS, or forever chemicals contamination, in the drinking water around the military bases. That's a big issue at Holloman Air Force Base. He made sure that there was a provision in the bill that prioritized building and modernizing housing at places like White Sands Missile Range, not just issuing waivers for housing that was insufficient, but actually building the housing that people needed. And he put in a provision that would increase opportunities for the Air Force to partner with places like New Mexico Tech for cyberspace training and operations. So he inserted into the bill provisions that would specifically benefit the Southern District of Texas. And also he voted for another inclusion in the bill that would provide a 5.2% pay raise for service members. So after adding those provisions to the bill, it's created its own version, and now Gabe's working with the Senate to make sure that his provisions are in the new bill, in the bill that will be the reconciliation bill. So that was his compromise. You can see other bills he's voted for at votesmart.org if you care to look, but we should not leave legislation behind before we talk about the Farm Bill, which is an upcoming vote. Gabe serves on the Agriculture Committee, and he's met across the district with stakeholders in the Farm Bill to make sure that the bill has voluntary conservation to keep more of New Mexico's water in the ground, but this is all voluntary, to promote rural development like farm worker housing, which is needed to attract our farm workers, making sure that the bill gets arsenic and lead out of our wastewater system, making sure that there are systems that help put food on the table for people who need it, and providing that food security, like SNAP benefits, TFAP benefits, and WIC benefits, incredibly important, because I believe New Mexico has a percentage of our population that uses those benefits more than any other state. While doing all of this, and this is an enormous amount for the first 9 months in Congress, Gabe is providing constituent services. One of his constituents won a $4,000 tax refund as a result of his help. And he makes sure that his constituents know that if they need help navigating the federal agencies like the IRS, they can stop by or call his offices in Albuquerque or Las Cruces. And he's got mobile office hours throughout the district. On top of that, he's met with people at a virtual town hall, which had thousands of people calling into it, a live town hall online, and then town halls in place, like the one in Alamosa Community Center in Albuquerque. Gabe is not only effective as a congressman, but he brings his democratic values to what he's doing. And I'll just quote from him as we end this. He says, "I've looked above the party politics to serve New Mexico while holding tight to my democratic values. We need to have compromise, but we also need to have those strong democratic values like protecting women's health care, supporting immigration reform, protecting our LGBTQ community, growing good jobs, protecting students, and making sure they can get an education, as well as workforce and occupational training. My democratic values are what I will always lead with, while making sure that while I'm here, I'm going to be effective and I'm going to be somebody that folks can trust." So I urge people who have heard this, and you can watch a PowerPoint on our website that goes through this with pictures and illustrations of the points I've made, to get louder and to get prouder about the congressman representing New Mexico's 2nd Congressional District. He's provided community funding when his predecessor did not. He's tackled every major issue with practical and, when possible, bipartisan proposals, knowing that the National Defense Authorization Act would pass in a changed form. He added value to it, and he consistently stands up for democratic values.
That was Sally Davis with the Blue CD2 New Mexico messaging team. Sally, we appreciate your research and detailed analysis. And to all of our listeners, don't forget that you can download the companion presentation, which contains this information in a visual format so that you can easily share in meetings or social media. You can download this for free on Blue CD2's website at www.bluecd2nm.com. Please consider supporting Blue CD2 New Mexico with a donation, or consider volunteering to help us reach our goals. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast and share this episode with your friends, family, and personal networks. The more people know about the great things Democrats are doing, the more successful we'll be in the next elections, and the more our communities will thrive. Thanks for listening to Red, Green, and Blue.
This program is paid for by Blue CD2 New Mexico USA and is not authorized by any candidate or candidate committee. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any entities they represent, or Blue CD2 New Mexico. For more information, visit us online at bluecd2nm.com.